I think we also all agree here that Mark Meadows will also find himself under oath in that grand jury eventually. What would you ask Mark Meadows?
Well, I would certainly want to know what conversations he had both before January 6th and in particular what was happening, the conversations he had on January 6th. We know that Donald Trump sat for hours and hours while police officers were being beaten and gouged and bear sprayed. He refused to lift a finger. We know there were multiple entreaties to him. Mark Meadows was a part of that. He could shed light on the president's state of mind for our Justice Department, looking at whether Donald Trump should be charged with things like insurrection or seditious conspiracy or other serious violations of the law. They are going to want to know what his state of mind was. And Mark Meadows is in a paramount position to be able to testify as to those issues.
Let's listen to what Cassidy Hutchinson told your committee about some of what Mark Meadows could testify to.
I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung. And Mark had responded something to the effect of, you heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong. To which Pat said something, this is effing crazy. We need to be doing something more.
So we just heard in that testimony that there are two people who heard Donald Trump say what Cassidy Hutchinson is describing, and that is White House counsel Pat Cipollone and Chief of Staff Mark Meadows.
Well, that's right, Lawrence. That testimony corroborating Cassidy Hutchinson, if it could be elicited from Mark Meadows, would be very important. Cassidy Hutchinson also testified about how on the mall, as people refuse to go through the metal detectors, and Donald Trump is complaining he doesn't like how the shot, the photograph is going to look, or the TV image of a less than full crowd. And he's told that people won't go through the magnetometers because they have weapons and they don't want their weapons taken away. And Donald Trump's response is, then take down the effing mags. That kind of evidence, if Meadows was also a witness to it, that the president knew the crowd was armed, knew they were dangerous, said, as Cassidy testified, that he didn't care because they weren't here to hurt him. This is, I think, among the most powerful evidence of the president's malign knowledge, corrupt intent, and Meadows could certainly corroborate that. Undoubtedly, there are other examples he could give of the president's state of mind. So he's a key witness. It is an indication, Lawrence, I think, now that we've gotten to the president's chief of staff and the vice president, that finally this investigation is reaching the very top and probably nearing its conclusion.
Mark Meadows can also give testimony about how Donald Trump handled government documents, including classified documents, during the presidency and after the presidency. Latest development on that is that we learned that some of those classified records were digitized, put on a thumb drive by one of the Trump aides, and that thumb drive was then sent to the Trump campaign. What does that do to what we know so already about the documents case?
Well, I think you're right. Meadows has some very important information about their handling of classified documents. There was a rather mysterious element to Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony of documents being brought over by members of the House Intelligence Committee to the White House. There's other testimony of documents being burned. We don't know what documents those were. We don't know where those documents that were brought over to the White House ended up either, whether any of them made it to Mar-a-Lago. And then, of course, you have this additional information now being reported about digitizing classified information ending up on a laptop. Finally, there may actually be a laptop issue worth investigating. But yes, Meadows could provide some really key information. And, given the other reported evidence of obstruction of the investigation, that is also going to be key to the special counsel's work.